Okay, so this week's lesson is about how scientific is sociology, and is sociology a science? This might seem like a very strange conversation, but when sociology started as a discipline and as a subject over 100 years ago, sciences were deemed of as being the pinnacle. In fact, in our college, maths is probably the hardest subject and the subject that gets you the most kudos if you can do maths and you can do maths well. If you end up leaving university with a maths degree, you're probably going to earn lots more money than you are if you leave university with a sociology degree. So, the conversation that we need to have goes as follows. We need to make sure that we understand what science is, and that's maybe the first paragraph of an essay, a Popper versus Kuhn kind of conversation. We then need to go on and look at positivism and what it says about this conversation. We then need to talk about interpretivism, and then we need to talk about realism. So 4 stages, and funnily enough, a 20-mark question is 4 paragraphs long. 4 stages, 4 paragraphs long, 4 conversations. You might ask, well, how am I going to evaluate these 4 paragraphs? Well, in saying how much these things affect a scientific conversation is all the evaluation you'll need if this essay comes up. By saying positivists think that it is a science and evaluating that idea, and interpretivists think it's not a science and evaluating that idea, you get the sort of gist, or hopefully you get the gist. So we need to be very well aware that these 4 areas are the 4 things we need to have a conversation on. Number 1. What is science? Okay, so we're going to talk about Popper. Popper isn't a sociologist, but what he says has implications for sociology and whether we can deem it to be a science. Okay, so Popper is very famous for talking about 2 things: hypodeductive methodology, hypodeductive methodology, and falsification. But to have that kind of story, we're going to talk about swans first. Okay, so as far as Popper is concerned, science is scientific if you can disprove or falsify a question. Okay, and so the question that he comes up with, if you can't disprove it, so I might say, for example, Derby County is by far the best football team in the world. Yeah. Now you might have a different opinion on that. You might not like football. You might not do football. You might think that Liverpool are the greatest football team in the world. You might think that Barcelona are. Yeah. But in my mind, because I am completely biased to the team that I support, yeah, then that opinion that I've got about Derby is not falsifiable. You can't falsify that, yeah, because I've already made my mind up and it's solid in my sort of consciousness. So Popper would argue that I'm not being scientific. So he gave the example of swans. Okay, so he said that a very bad question would be, all swans are white. Well, you might think all swans are white, yeah, but that would be a very bad, unscientific question. What you should be asking is, are all swans white? And then you should go out and try and disprove that fact. If you can't disprove it, it's probably true. And therefore, we have this kind of open hand conversation, okay? That we're holding the idea with an open hand and we're quite happy for somebody to come along and disprove it. And don't you know, all swans aren't white. There are grey swans that come from the Crimea. There are black swans, you can Google this by the way, that come from China. So therefore, it would be very naive of us to say all swans are white, because that's patently and blatantly not true. So Popper argues that we need to think about truth, we need to think about falsification, and we need to have an open hand when we're having a conversation. So, what does this say for sociology? Well, I don't know if feminists and Marxists and postmodernists and functionalists particularly have an open hand with how they see the world. Maybe functionalists think they do, we'll come back and talk about them in a minute, but quite a lot of sociology is biased. It's very biased. Feminists are very biased. I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just saying they have a point of view that they stick to. Marxists are very biased. Again, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but they do have a point of view, a way that they see the world. So Popper would argue that they can't be scientific and therefore sociology can't be scientific. Now, what Popper would think is scientific is Emile Durkheim's study of suicide. Now, I'm going to talk about suicide a little bit later, and as an extension activity, I'm going to send you my Prezi on suicide, which is for those students who want to get the A's and B's. Because for the next two conversations, sociology as a science and values in sociology, positivists, especially Emile Durkheim, look to the study that Emile Durkheim did on suicide to say sociology is a science and sociology can be studied free of values. So it's important for us to be aware of it if we want to get those B, A and A star grades. But I am aware it's also a sensitive topic of conversation. So we need to be aware also that if you have been affected by any of the kind of ideas around suicide, family member or anything like that, I am giving you complete freedom to ignore it as a topic, and then you don't need to go anywhere near it, which is why it's being used as an extension activity. Okay. Okay, now we come to Kuhn, if you like, the evaluation of Popper. So we've got Popper and Kuhn that are evaluating each other. One can be used as knowledge and one can be used as evaluation in an essay. And Popper kind of says, well, we don't really, Kuhn kind of says that we don't really agree on anything in sociology. And for something to be scientific, we've got to agree on it. So, for example, we all agree what a gram is, we all agree what a millimetre is, we all agree what the speed of light is, even though it's changed, I think, about 7 times since Einstein came up with the idea. So we have to agree on the units for study for that to be. So we have to have a paradigm, a sort of overarching set of ideas that help us understand what we are studying. He talks quite a lot about this word paradigm, does Kuhn. And that in sociology we don't have any agreed paradigms, any agreed ways of studying. Functionalists, Marxists, feminists, action theorists, postmodernists all study in very different ways and all have very different ways of studying. So therefore there is no agreement, so therefore sociology can't really be a science. He goes on to have a go at science itself, because while he says that there's this thing called normal or natural science, that I could pick one of you up, I could throw you out the window, I could measure how heavy you are, I could measure the distance I threw you and how much force that was needed, normal science. When we get into anywhere like string theory or chaos theory or any of those kind of ideas, then is it just a theory? Can we prove the idea of quantum theory, that as soon as you measure something, it changes what you're measuring? So therefore you can't ever know reality. It just starts hurting your head and starts hurting your brain. So we need to be aware that Kuhn argues that quite a lot of science isn't scientific. And therefore, and science changes as well. That, if we go back 50 years ago, in science, the end of the world was going to happen by a big ice age that was going to come along and we're all going to get covered in ice. Nobody thinks that today. Everybody thinks that global warming is going to kill everybody. So therefore, again, as far as Kuhn is concerned, nothing in sociology is scientific. It's all theory and bias led. Idea number 2. Positivism and science. Okay, so if I'm a positivist, really I'm talking about functionalism, then I'm arguing that through inductive reasoning, studying the world in a sort of scientific way, I can absolutely understand the world and prove it. In fact, Emile Durkheim is looking for social facts. He believes that the world is built on solid ideas, okay, absolutely solid ideas that shape us and guide us and that are real solid things, a little bit like the wall that you might be looking at right now, a little bit like gravity. Yeah, and it doesn't matter what I think about those ideas, they exist. Okay, so it's a little bit like if I went up on the top of my house here that I'm sitting in right now, and I jumped off the top of the building here and shouted, "I don't believe in gravity," I'm still going to hit the floor. Emile Durkheim believes that there are things like that gravity that exist for social beings. And he wants to try and study them. He calls them social facts. So he did a seminal study on suicide where he got lots and lots of suicide statistics from all the countries in Europe. He looked at them in this thing that we've already looked at when we looked at experiments at Christmas, and I reminded you of those a few weeks ago. Comparative methodology. He compared those statistics and came up with some ideas, which we'll look at in the next bit. Okay, so he's very interested in this idea of verifications and proving stuff. Yeah, he thinks that in society we should be searching to prove stuff so that we can understand how society works, and then we can help society work better. So here we have his sort of graph that he came up with at the end in the right hand side there, that little XY graph. And when he looked at all of the statistics, he came up with 4 different types of suicide that people might go. And you can plot yourself on this graph. Well, not obviously you plotting yourself, but one can plot oneself on this graph. So I'm going to start from the bottom up because the top one is the one he's most interested in. So egoistic suicide is the kind of suicide where you have, we have not enough integration, that you're not integrated, you're a loner, homeless person maybe, yeah, that you have no links into society in any way whatsoever. Okay, fatalistic suicide is where you have too much regulation, too many rules. Okay, then you have altruistic suicide where you have too much integration, yeah, where you might commit suicide to save somebody else. See a kid in the road, bus coming towards them, you run out and push the kid out the way but get hit yourself. That kind of thinking about society more than thinking about yourself. And then anomic suicide, where everything changes, yeah, really quickly, where society breaks down, or your norms and your regulations and your values change very quickly. Maybe after a war, maybe you've been saving up loads of money because you base all of your world on money, and then it all gets lost, like it might have done for some people at the moment. Their world changes, yeah, and that would be that no sort of sense of normlessness. That's what anomie is, a sense of normlessness. So he was most interested in that anomic suicide, when people's norms and values disintegrate. Okay, so as far as Emile Durkheim is concerned, he's done science, comparative methodology, comparing statistics. Okay, he comes up with a graph, and then he discovers that people are affected by how integrated they are into society and how regulated they are by society. So therefore, integration and regulation are social facts. Things that affect you that you can do nothing about, but are as real as the bed you might be sitting on, or the cupboard you might be looking at, or the phone you might be watching this on. So, in short, positivists believe that sociology can be a science and society can be studied in a scientific way. Number 3. Interpretivism and science. So here, when we're looking at interpretivism, we kind of have the opposite side of the coin from positivism. Interpretivists are mainly action theorists. They're interested in meaning, they're interested in validity. Okay, they're interested in really getting to grips with how people see the world. This whole idea of Verstehen that is laid out in the textbook for you. Okay, so an interpretivist is going to be exactly the opposite. Of course, sociology can't be scientific because people are going to react very differently from and to the stimulus that society gives them. Again, remember, for most of you, I will have done the sort of candle idea. So again, if you've not done this, then have a little think of it right now. How many different reasons can you think for lighting a candle? Have a little think. If you like, pause and write down as many as you can. I think I can come up with easily 20 or 30 different reasons for lighting a candle, and a lot of them would be religious ones. Okay. However, what we are saying here is how do I know why you've lit your candle? And that's a meaning thing, because it might look very similar. Lighting a candle to a relative that's gone and you're remembering their birthday, or lighting a candle because you just want to look at it, or lighting a candle. Sometimes it's going to be easy. If you're in a church, I might have some ideas, but then even in a church, I might not have the right idea. The only way I'm going to know is if I ask you and you tell me, and therefore that's about meaning. So therefore, interpretivists don't think sociology can be a science in any way, shape or form. Yeah, because sociology is about understanding how people's meaning shapes their world around them. And therefore, people like Douglas and Atkinson are sociologists that look at suicide specifically and specifically try and attack Emile Durkheim's ideas. Well, again, they're arguing the opposite, that really the coroners that call whether something's going to be a suicide might be biased and shaped by religion. And they're also talking about the meaning that people put into suicide. Yeah, some people it might be a shout for help. Some people it might be the only way they think they can get out of the situation that they're in. So therefore it's a meaning conversation. It's got nothing to do with society and how you fit into society. So again, interpretivism, exactly the opposite from positivism. Have a good look into your textbook. Any questions, drop me a line. Number 4. Realism and science. So here, realists are kind of in the middle, I suppose, of interpretivists and positivists. Because realists, like some that we've studied already from the New Right perspective, but we'll study more when we come to crime and deviance, realists always start by using official statistics. If I'm a right realist, I completely trust those official statistics. So the New Right people that we've looked at completely trust official statistics, whereas left realists are a little bit more sceptical, but agree that we've got to understand the world around us and statistics are the best way to start. Statistics are more of a scientific way of dealing with the situation. Okay, so they want to understand the structure of society, and they want to understand that structure in an open way. Not so bothered about those sort of close. So remember the hand I was talking about. An open system is one that can be looked at and be challenged and be verified, and you can have falsification. A closed system is one where we believe what we believe, everybody else can stuff off. Yeah. So we have that kind of situation. So realists start by using statistics, and then they move on and they look at other research methods, whether that's observation or interviews or documents. So they kind of use both kinds of things. So they kind of are, well, sociology can be a little bit scientific because we're trying to understand all of society, but it's not really that scientific. Okay, so we have that position. So there are the 4 points of view laid out for you. Your textbook doesn't quite follow in the way that I've done there, but it has all of those bits in it in your textbook. I think my way is clearer than your textbook does it, and it's better for writing an essay in this way. So in conclusion, we've talked about positivism, they think sociology is a science. So on one hand we have positivism, on the other hand we have interpretivism, and they're saying that sociology isn't a science. So on one level you could just write about those 2 points of view, I think, if you are having a conversation about science. But to get those better grades you need more complexity and you need more depth. So I think it's always nice to start a conversation about sociology as a science being what is science, and that's your Popper versus Kuhn conversation, and then you need to have a conversation about realism to give you that depth. So there are your 4 points. There are the 4 things you can write about in this week's essay, and to be fair, they are the 4 things you should be writing about in this week's essay. Again, hope this has been helpful. It'd be really good to hear your feedback of whether these lessons like this are helpful, and keep safe, stay alert, and control the virus.